I heard the latch on the barn door lift a little after midnight, and I went out into the storm with my rifle, half certain it was wolves come down off the ridge for the colt. It wasn't wolves. It was a woman standing in the dark with a skinning knife held low and steady, and behind her, pressed into the straw with a horse blanket pulled to her chin, a little girl whose eyes caught my lantern and didn't blink. "You'll want to put that down," I said, meaning the knife. "You'll want to step back," she said, meaning me, and she didn't move the blade an inch. The wind was driving snow sideways through the gap in the door, and the colt was screaming in his stall, and there I stood, a man who had spent 15 years making sure he never had a single living thing to answer for, looking at two of them at once. I have thought about that night more times than I can count. I have turned it over the way a man turns a smooth stone in his pocket on a long ride. And I have come to believe that whatever a man builds his life to keep out, the thing that finally gets in does not knock. It lifts the latch in a storm and dares you to send it back into the cold. I did not send them back. That is the whole of the story, and everything else is only how. My name is Isaac Calder. In those years I ran a horse outfit at the high end of a valley they called Coldwater Park, where the sweetgrass came down off the granite in a hurry and slowed to think things over in the bottomland before it left the country for good. I had a cabin, a barn, 400 acres of grass I did not own and 160 I did, and a string of half-broke horses that were the only company I wanted. I had come up out of the cavalry with a bad shoulder and a worse conscience, and I had taught myself the one thing I was good for, which was making a frightened animal trust a man's hands again. I did not extend the same patience to people. People I kept at the length of a long fence line. I lowered the rifle because you do not point a gun at a child, not for any reason, not ever, and a man who would is not a man. "There's a stove in the cabin," I said. "The barn's no place to freeze. Bring the girl." The woman studied me the way I studied a horse I didn't trust, looking for the flinch, the tell, the moment the gentleness would slip and show the thing underneath. She found nothing because there was nothing to find, only a tired man and a storm. But she didn't sheath the knife. "We'll stay here," she said. "We won't trouble you. We'll be gone before light." "You'll be dead before light," I said. "It's 11 below and dropping. Suit yourself on the knife. Bring it inside if it makes you easy, but bring the girl to the stove." The child sat up out of the blanket then, and I saw she was maybe 6, maybe 7, thin as a willow switch, with a face that had decided very early that the world was a thing to be watched and not trusted. In her 2 hands she held a small carved fox, the wood worn pale at the ears and tail where small thumbs had rubbed it for comfort 1,000 times. She looked at the woman, and the woman looked at her, and something passed between them that did not need words, and the woman put the knife away. "All right," she said, to me but mostly to the girl. "All right, Etta, come on." That was how Marin Vance and the child Etta came to my fire, and how the door I had nailed shut against the whole human race got pried open by a storm and a skinning knife and a little wooden fox. I built the stove up and made coffee I doubted either of them would drink, and put out bread and the end of a ham, and I did not ask them anything. I have noticed that frightened creatures tell you more in the quiet than they ever will under questioning. The woman ate carefully, the way a person eats who has learned that the next meal is not promised. She tore the bread small and gave the larger half to the girl every time, and she watched the door and the window and me, in that order, all night. She was younger than I'd first taken her for, with the weather burned into her face the way it gets burned into people who live by the seasons and not by a town clock. Dark hair come loose from its braid, hands that were small and scarred and quick. There was a stillness to her that I recognized, because I had it myself, the stillness of a person who has trained themselves to give nothing away, who has learned that a still face buys time, and time is sometimes the only currency a person has. The girl fell asleep at the table with the fox in her fist, her head pillowed on her arm, and the woman moved her to the bunk along the wall as easy as breathing, and tucked my spare blanket around her and stood over her a moment with her back to me. When she turned around, her face had changed. Not softened, sharpened. I'll tell you what you need to know and nothing else, she said. Men are looking for us, 3 or 4. They'll work the valleys. They were in Larkspur 4 days back, asking after a woman and a girl, paying for talk. If they come here, you tell them you never saw us, and that's no lie if we're gone before they ask. We'll go at first light. I'd be obliged for the night, and I'll pay for the food. You won't pay for the food, I said. She set her jaw. I pay my way. Then chop the deadfall by the woodshed in the morning and we're square. Who's hunting you? That's the part I don't tell you. I let it sit. The fire ticked. The storm leaned on the cabin and the cabin leaned back, the way it had for 10 winters. You're the girl's mother, I said. I'm her aunt. Her mother was my sister. A muscle moved in her cheek. June, she died in the fall. And the father? Dead before that, doesn't matter. She said it too fast. I have broken a great many horses, and I will tell you the one thing the work teaches you above all else. You cannot rush trust and you cannot fake it, and the second you reach for it before it's offered, you lose it for a week. So I didn't reach. There's the bunk for the girl, I said, getting up. You take the chair by the stove or the floor by it, however you sleep. I'll be in the lean-to with the colt. He's spooked and he'll do something foolish if he's left alone in this. Bar the door behind me. If anybody but me knocks, you don't open it, and there's a shotgun over the lintel loaded, both barrels. I shrugged into my coat. You know how to use one. For the first time, something crossed her face that was almost a smile, except there was no warmth in it, only a kind of grim private knowledge. Mister, she said, I know how to use most everything. I went out into the storm and pulled the door shut and heard the bar drop, and I stood a minute in the blowing snow looking at the light in my own window, which I had not seen lit from the outside since I built the place. It looked, I will be honest, like a thing worth coming home to. I had spent a long time making sure I would never think a thought like that again. I went and sat with the colt and didn't sleep. In the morning the storm had blown itself out and left the world scoured and blinding white, and the woman was already up and at the deadfall, and she swung an axe like she'd been born with one in her hands. I watched her from the barn for a minute before she knew I was there, the way she set each round on the block, read the grain, and split it true on the first stroke, no wasted motion anywhere in her. The girl sat on the woodpile, bundled in my coat, the fox in her lap, watching her aunt and watching the tree line both, a child who had learned to keep one eye on the woods. You'll wear yourself out, I said. I'll wear myself out paid up, she said, and split another round. I made breakfast. Etta ate like a stray cat, fast and watchful, ready to bolt. When I set a second helping in front of her, she looked at me as though I'd done something suspicious, and then she looked at the fox, and then she ate it. That's a fine fox, I said to her. Somebody carve it for you. She didn't answer. She had not in 12 hours said a single word in my hearing. Her mother made it, Marin said from the doorway, stamping snow off her boots. June was clever with a knife, cleverer than me, and I'm not slow. She crossed and set her hand light on the girl's hair, and the girl leaned into it the smallest amount, the way a plant leans at a window. Etta doesn't talk much these days. She used to. No hurry, I said to the girl. I don't talk much myself. We'll get along. I should not have said we'll. It implied a future, and I had told myself there would be no future in this, only a breakfast and a road. But the word came out of me on its own. The way a horse you've handled gently will sometimes come to the fence to find you before you've called him. Marin heard it. She didn't say anything, but she heard it, and a little of the iron went out of her shoulders. And she sat down and ate, and for a few minutes there were 3 people at my table in the morning light, and nobody was afraid. And I had not known until that moment that I had been hungry for exactly that, and only that, for 15 years. Then a horse came up the valley track. I saw the iron go back into her before I heard it myself. She had ears like a fox, that woman. She always heard things a half-second before the rest of the world. And she had Etta off the bench and behind the stove and the shotgun off the lintel in the time it took me to push back my chair. One rider, I said, going to the window. Coming slow, not hunting. A hunter doesn't come up the open track in the daylight. You don't know what a hunter does, she said low, and put herself between the girl and the door. But it was only Harlan Prout, who freighted the high country and stopped at my place twice a month for coffee, and to rest his team on the long pull. A fat, decent man who had never in his life done a hurried thing. I went out to meet him so he wouldn't come to the door, and we stood by his wagon and talked weather and horses, and I bought a sack of flour and a tin of peaches off him I didn't need. And then, because I am not a fool and I had been thinking all morning, I said, easy as anything. You hear of any trouble down to Larkspur? Strangers passing through. Harlan scratched under his hat. Funny you ask. There's some hard cases came up from the railhead, asking after a woman with a child, saying she stole the child, run off with her, that there's a reward. Tamblin's the name behind it, Royce Tamblin. He's got money and he's spreading it. Bought drinks the whole night at the Antler and told it loud, said the woman's a thief and worse, said the girl's his blood and his ward and he means to have her back. Harlan shook his head. I don't like the smell of it. Man who has to buy that many friends to get a child usually ain't fit to keep a dog. You watch yourself up here, Asa. They're working the valleys. I'll watch myself, I said. I gave him the peaches back for his trouble and watched him roll on down the track, and then I stood there a while in the bright cold with my hands in my pockets and made a decision I had no business making, the kind of decision that rearranges a man's whole life around it before he's even finished thinking it. I went back inside. Marin had the shotgun across her knees and Etta tucked behind her and that watchful nothing face on, ready to hear that the freighter had brought word, ready to run. It's not what you think, I said. It's worse. There's a man named Royce Tamblin offering money for you up and down the line, telling it that you stole the girl and he's her rightful guardian. I watched her face go from fear to something hotter, something that was almost relief, the relief of a fight you've been bracing for finally being out in the open. I figure that's a lie. I figure if it were the truth you'd have gone to the law your own self, not run for the high country in November with nothing but a knife and a child. So I'm going to ask you straight, and you can tell me or not. Who is Royce Tamblin to that girl, and what does he want her for? She looked at me a long time. Then she set the shotgun down carefully, and she told me. Her sister June had married a man named Cole Tamblin against the wishes of everybody who loved her, because June had a soft heart and Cole had a soft voice, and the rest of him was neither. The Tamblins were 3 brothers who had come into the territory early and grabbed land the way a drowning man grabs a rope, and the best piece of it was a stretch of river bottom down on the Quill, black soil, good water, the only ground in 40 miles a man could grow a real crop on instead of just running cows over rock. Old Tamblin had left it, by some quirk of a will and a temper, not to all 3 sons together, but to Cole alone, the youngest, the one he'd thought he could control. And it had eaten the other 2 brothers alive with wanting it, especially the eldest, Royce. Cole drank himself off a horse and into the river 2 winters passed and drowned, and the bottomland passed, clean and clear, to his only child, to Etta, 6 years old and the owner of the one piece of ground 3 grown men had been circling for 20 years. June knew, Marin said. June wasn't soft about everything. She knew Royce wanted that land and the only thing standing between him and it was a little girl. So when she got sick, it was her lungs, it came on fast and it didn't let go. She did 3 things. She wrote out plain in front of the doctor and the preacher both that I was to have Etta. Guardian in her own hand, witnessed and signed. She sent for me to come. And she made me swear that whatever Royce said, whatever paper he waved, whatever lie he told, I'd never let him get his hands on that child, because a man who'd use a 6-year-old to get at a riverbank is a man who'd find the child inconvenient the day the land was his. Her voice did not break. It got very flat and very hard, which I came to learn was the same as breaking in her. I got there in time to bury her. Royce got there in time to read the will. He had a lawyer up from the railhead before the dirt was settled, claiming the will was got up under duress, claiming I'd bewitched a dying woman, claiming next of kin he's the child's uncle, see, and I'm only an aunt on the mother's side, and to a certain kind of judge that's a thing that can be argued. He got an order out of a friendly clerk while the real judge was off on his circuit. So when his men came to the house to take her, it wasn't bandits, it had a paper behind it. She looked at me. That's why I didn't go to the law. The law, the piece of it that was awake that week, was already his. So I took Etta and her mother's letter and June's good knife and we went out the back window, and we've been going ever since. Outside, a horse stamped, and we both startled, and it was only my colt in the corral, and we both breathed again, and I understood for the first time how long they had been living inside that single-held breath. "How long?" I said. 19 days. 19 days. A woman and a child running 19 days through a hardening country, eating what she could snare and shoot, sleeping cold, never 2 nights in one place, with men and money behind them and a piece of paper that the wrong judge would honor. "You said you've got the letter," I said. "June's letter nomming you. Sewn into the lining of Etta's coat. The one thing they can never take because they don't know it's there, and I'll burn before I let it leave that child." She said it the way you'd say a thing you'd already decided to die for, which I suppose she had. I thought about my vow. I had made it on a cold morning 15 years before, kneeling in mud that was the wrong color, holding a friend who had trusted my judgment about a trail through a draw, a judgment I had given too confident and too fast, a draw that had a thing in it I should have scouted and hadn't. I had told him it was clear. It was not clear. I had buried what I could of him and what I could of 11 other men, and I had walked out of the cavalry and into the high lonesome with a single rule I would never break again. I would never let another living soul put their life in my hands, because my hands could not be trusted, and the proof of it was in a draw 1,000 miles away with the wrong-colored mud. And here was a woman setting 2 lives down on my table like a bet she couldn't cover, and looking at me, waiting to be told to run again. "You're not going at first light," I said. She went still. "I told you we don't stay anywhere. Staying is how you get caught." "Running is how you get caught," I said. "You've been running 19 days and they're still behind you, because a woman alone afoot with a child can't outrun money on horseback forever. The country's too big and the help's too cheap to buy. You don't outrun this. You wait it out somewhere they can't get at you easy, and you make them come to ground you've chosen, and meanwhile you get that letter in front of the right judge." I had not planned to say any of it. It was coming out of me the way water comes out of rock once the freeze cracks it. This is the last cabin on the last track at the high end of a box valley. There's one way in and I can see it for 2 miles. There's a man here who can shoot and a barn full of horses and a winter coming that'll close the passes inside a month and lock the whole country down till spring. You don't run another mile. You hole up. Right here. And we figure how to beat the man at his own game instead of dying tired in the snow. I stopped, surprised at myself, and added the only honest thing left in me. "I'm not a safe man to lean on, ma'am. I'll tell you that plain, but I'm a stubborn one. And stubborn might be worth more to you right now than safe." Etta had come out from behind the stove while I talked, the fox in her fist, and she was looking up at me with those watching eyes, and very slowly she walked over and put the little wooden fox on the table in front of me, between us, the way you'd put down a thing you wanted looked after. Then she said, in a small rusty voice that hadn't been used in a while, the first words I ever heard her speak, "He has good hands." She had been watching me with the colt through the window. Children see more than anyone gives them credit for, and they decide a man by his hands, which is the truest way there is. I looked at the fox, and I looked at the child, and I looked at Marin Vance, who was staring at her niece like the girl had spoken in tongues, with her eyes gone bright and her hard mouth trembling at one corner. "All right," Marin said when she could. "All right, we'll stay." I will not pretend the days that followed were soft. We were 3 wary people in one small cabin with a killing frost coming on and a rich man's hate working its way up the valleys, and there was a deal of silence between us that took weeks to wear into anything like ease. But I have come to believe that the best things in a life are built the way I built that cabin, one fitted log at a time, in no hurry, each one bearing the weight of the next. She earned her keep, and then she earned it 3 times over, and then I stopped keeping count. Marin Vance was the most capable human being I have ever shared a roof with, and I'm including in that every scout and sergeant I ever served under. Her father had been a trapper up in the high Lonesome, and he'd raised her to it after her mother died, raised her like a son and a daughter both, and there was nothing in that country she couldn't read or take or make. She set snares that caught what my traps had missed for years. She found a marten run I'd walked past 100 times. She could look at a track in the snow and tell you what made it, how heavy, how long ago, and which way its mind was bent. That last being the part most folks can't learn, the reading of an animal's intention out of the way its feet fell. She handled the spooky colt I'd half given up on, not the way I did with patience, but with a kind of brisk fairness the horse seemed to prefer. And inside a week, he was following her around the corral like a dog. And she could shoot. Lord, she could shoot. I set up a row of pinecones on a stump at 50 yards one afternoon, half to test her and half to show off, and she took my old single shot and put 4 cones into the snow before I'd finished telling her where to aim, and then she handed it back and said, "Sights pull left. You favor it without knowing. That's why you missed that buck last fall," which I had not told her about and which was true. "How'd you? You've got buck hair on your skinning peg and no hide on the wall and a look on your face when I mention it. A miss eats at a man." She almost smiled. "I read people same as tracks. It's all the same skill. Folks just don't like to think they leave a trail." The town, the few times I went down for the things winter required, was thick with Royce Tamblin's money and Royce Tamblin's story. He'd put out that the woman was unstable, that she'd taken the child in the night, that there was a generous reward and no questions asked. Money makes a lie heavy, and a heavy lie sinks into a town and stays. Men who'd known me for years looked at me sidewise, wondering. I bought what I needed and said nothing and gave nothing away, and I rode home the long way twice to make sure no one followed me up to the park, cutting cross-country over rock that wouldn't take a track, the way a man learns to do when he's been scouted himself. It was Etta who broke me in the end. I want to be clear that I did not soften toward Marin first, the way it might go in a story somebody made up to be pleasant. I softened toward the child first, because she gave me no choice in it. She took to following me at my chores, 3 steps back, the fox in her fist, saying nothing, watching everything. When I doctored a horse, she watched my hands. When I mended tack, she watched my hands. One bitter morning, I found her in the barn before light, trying to fork hay to the horses with a fork twice her size, because she'd noticed that was the first thing I did, and she wanted to do a thing that was useful. And she'd gotten exactly 1 forkful into the manger, and was near tears with the failure of it. A 6-year-old crying not because she was cold or hungry or scared, which she had every right to be, but because she could not yet pull her own weight in a world that had taught her a person had to. I knelt down and put my hands over her small ones on the fork handle. "Like this," I said. "You don't lift it. You let the fork do the lifting and you just steer. Watch." And we forked the hay together, her hands inside mine, and the horses came to the manger and blew their warm breath on us both, and Etta laughed. It was the first time I'd heard it. A child's laugh in my barn in the cold dark over a forkful of hay. It went into me like a splinter of light into a long-shut room, and it lodged there, and it has never come out, and I have never wanted it to. I turned around, and Marin was standing in the barn door watching us, and there was a look on her face I had not earned and did not deserve, and could not stop wanting from that moment on. The thaw between Marin and me came at the fire, the way I suppose those things mostly do, in the long quiet hours after Etta slept, when there was nothing to do but tend the stove and not say the things we weren't ready to say. She asked me one night plain, "What's your wound?" Because she'd seen by then that I had one, she read people same as tracks, and because she'd told me hers and there's a debt in that. So I told her about the draw and the wrong-colored mud and the confident young scout I'd been, and the 11 men and the one friend and the vow. I had never told it to a living soul. It came out of me halting and ugly, and I did not dress it up, and when I was done I felt scraped hollow, and I waited for her to say one of the things people say, that it wasn't my fault, that I'd done my best, that I couldn't have known, the soft, useless things that are meant to help and only prove the person didn't hear you. She didn't say any of them. She said after a while my father got caught in his own deadfall once, a big one set for bear, walked his own line in a whiteout and forgot which sets he'd sprung and which he hadn't, and a log came down across his leg and broke it in 2 places, and he lay there a day and a half before I found him. He'd built that trap, his own hands. He knew exactly how it worked, and it took him anyway. She looked into the fire. He didn't quit trapping, he couldn't. It was who he was. But he checked his sets different after that, slower, twice. He let me walk the dangerous line. He stopped trusting that knowing a thing kept you safe from it, and he started trusting the people who walked beside him to catch what he missed. She looked at me then. You scouted that draw alone because you thought you were the only one who could be trusted to do it right. That's the wound, Asa. Not that you were wrong, that you were alone. You don't owe those men a life spent making sure you never matter to anybody again. You owe them a life where you let somebody walk the line beside you. I had no answer for that. I have thought about it every day since. I think it is the truest thing anybody has ever said to me, and it was said by a hunted woman in a borrowed cabin with a price on her head, who had less reason than anyone alive to believe that leaning on another person was anything but a way to get killed, and who was, even saying it, choosing to lean on me anyway, with the only thing she had left to lose curled up asleep in my bunk. I reached across the space between our chairs and I put my hand over hers, the way I'd put my hands over Etta's on the fork handle, and she turned her hand over under mine and held on, and we sat like that a long while and did not say anything else, because there was nothing else that needed saying, and some doors when they open at last open quiet. Royce Tamblyn came up the valley in the 2nd week of December, in the daylight, up the open track, with 2 men behind him. He came openly because he wanted me to see he wasn't afraid of being seen, and because he'd traded force for law and law likes daylight. He was a big, soft, heavy man gone hard in the way that soft men go hard, with good clothes and a townsman's hat, and a way of looking at a place, at my place, that priced it as he rode through the gate, totting up what it was worth and what it would take to have it. The 2 with him were railhead men. Hired guns gone a little to seed, the kind who do a thing for money and not think about it after. Marin had Etta in the root cellar before he'd come within a quarter mile, the trap door under the rug under the table, the child silent as a held breath because she'd been taught silence the way other children are taught their letters. Marin herself stood inside the cabin window with the shotgun out of sight, where she could hear every word. We'd planned it the night before, sitting at the fire, because I'd seen this coming up the valley in my mind for a week. I went out to meet him alone, easy, my rifle left inside on purpose, my hands empty, because an empty-handed man is harder to justify shooting, and Royce Tamblyn was a man who'd need to justify a thing to himself before he did it. "You'd be Calder," he said, not getting down. "I'll come to it. I'm looking for a woman, a thief. She took something of mine, my late brother's child, my own ward by every right of blood and law, and the trail says she came up this valley a month back. I'm a reasonable man. There's $200 in it for the man who helps me set it right, and no trouble for a man who's only been imposed on by a clever woman with a sad story. I don't blame a man for being fooled." He smiled. It was a smile that had bought a lot of things. I blame a man who keeps fooling himself once he knows better. "That's a deal of money for one child," I said. "She's blood. Blood that comes with a riverbank." The smile went off his face like a lamp blown out, and I saw the thing underneath, and Harlan Pruitt had been right. It was not fit to keep a dog. "I don't know what poison that woman poured in your ear," Royce said, very quiet now, "but I'd think hard, Calder, about whose word a sensible man takes. The word of a drifter female with no kin and no standing and a stolen child, or the word of a man of property with the law's own paper in his saddlebag. He patted it. I have an order signed naming me guardian. That's not a story I'm telling you. That's a fact you can read. Harboring a fugitive from that order makes you a party to her crime, and I will see you ruined for it, your stock, your land, your name. I will spend more breaking you than this place is worth, because that's the kind of reasonable man I am about my blood. Now, he gathered his reins. I'll give you till the new year, out of Christian feeling, to do the right thing and turn her over to the law, which is to say to me, since the law and I are presently of one mind. After that, I come with a posse and a writ, and I take what's mine, and I take you down with her. He looked past me at the cabin, at the lit window. Tell her Royce says hello. He turned his horse, and his men turned theirs, and they rode back down my valley, and I stood in the cold and let them go, because there was nothing to be gained that day but a death I couldn't undo, and a dead Royce Tamblyn would only have made Marin and Etta the murderers his lie already called them. I went back inside. Marin had not moved from the window, but her face was wet, and she was not the kind to let a thing like that show, and the fact that she had not been able to stop it told me more about that man's reach into her than any words could have. He has a paper, she said. He has a paper got off a crooked clerk while the real judge was on circuit. You told me that yourself. I took the shotgun from her hands and set it down and took her by the shoulders. A crooked paper can be unmade by an honest one. You've got June's letter, witnessed by a doctor and a preacher. That's a stronger paper than his if it gets in front of a judge who isn't bought, so we get it in front of one. He said New Year. After that he comes with a posse. She looked up at me. Asa, by the New Year the passes are shut. The circuit judge won't be back through this country till the snow breaks in April. There's no honest judge inside this valley before then, and there's no getting out of it once it closes. He's not giving us till the New Year out of Christian feeling. He's giving it to us because he counted the passes same as you and me. He means for us to be locked in here with him and his money and his men, with no law within 50 feet of snow, all winter long. She said it the way she said all her hardest things, flat and clear. He boxed us. He let us run to the one place that traps us, and now he's shut the lid. She was right. I'd been so pleased with my box canyon and my one-way in, and my locking passes that I hadn't done the second sum, the one she did in her head while she stood at the window with her child under the floor. The lid that keeps the wolf out keeps you in with him too. Then we don't wait for the circuit judge, I said, thinking hard. Where's the nearest honest court that isn't bought and isn't snowed in? Fort Garnet. There's a federal commissioner there, my father knew him, an honest one, and a guardianship dispute over an estate that touches Indian Treaty bottomland is a federal question. It can go to him. It's 90 miles. She let out a breath. 90 miles and the Tule Pass closes with the next big storm, and there's no telling when that is, could be a week, could be tomorrow. And the second I'm gone from this cabin, you're a man alone holding a child against a posse with a paper. You can't ride for Garnet, Asa. They want you at the gate when they come, or there's no gate. We stood there in the failing light with the size of it on us. And then I understood, the way you understand a thing all at once and feel the floor of your life shift, what the answer was, and why it was the hardest answer there could be, and why it was the only one. You ride, I said. She fought me on it half the night. Not because she was afraid to ride 90 miles through closing country in December. She was the one of us best fit for it, and we both knew it. She could read a trail in the dark and live off a snare and outthink weather, and I'd have been a week where she'd be 3 days. She fought me because riding meant leaving Etta. Leaving the child with me, the unsafe man, the man with the wrong-colored mud in his past, while she rode away into the white toward a paper that might not come back in time. You swore to June, I said when she'd run down at last and was sitting by the cold stove with her face in her hands. You swore you'd never let him have her. You think waiting here is keeping that oath. Waiting here is letting the snow keep her for him. The only way to keep that oath is to ride out and bring back the one thing that beats his paper, a federal order nomming you. And the only person in this valley who can make that ride is you. I can hold a gate. Any stubborn fool can hold a gate. I can't read the Thule in a whiteout and you can. I knelt down in front of her. You told me my whole wound was that I'd never let anybody walk the line beside me. Well, here's me letting you. I'm putting the one thing I've come to care about in this world into your hands and trusting you to walk the dangerous line because you're the one fit to walk it. That's the most I've trusted anybody since the draw. Don't tell me I can't when you're the one taught me how. She lifted her head. There were no tears on her now. She'd burned through them. What was left was the iron, but it was iron pointed at the problem now instead of at me. If they come before I'm back, she said. I hold the gate. There's 3 of them at least, and more if he buys them. Then I hold it stubborn. Asa, her voice cracked just once on my name, if I lose her. You won't lose her, I said. She'll be here when you come back. I'll have good hands on her the whole time, she said it herself. That got the smallest, wettest laugh out of her. And then she did a thing I did not expect, which was to take my face in her 2 scarred quick hands and kiss me, once, hard and brief and fierce, the way you'd seal a bargain you meant to keep or die keeping, and then she stood up and started laying out her ride. We did not say the larger things. There wasn't time and we weren't the kind, and anyway some bargains a held look seals better than a speech. But I knew, and she knew, what was understood between us by then. It had been understood since the morning in the barn with the hay fork. We were past the part where it had to be said. She woke Etta and explained it to her plain, the way she explained everything. No soft lies that she had to ride and fetch a paper from a good man far away that would keep them safe forever, and that it would take some days, and that Asa would mind her, and that she would come back, she promised. She would always come back. And Etta listened with her watching eyes. And when Marin was done, the child got down and went to her little hiding place behind the stove and came back with the fox, and she put it in her aunt's hands. And she said, "He keeps you safe. Mama said you take him this time." I have seen brave things in my life. I served in a hard war, and I have watched men do the things that get written up. I never saw anything braver than that 6-year-old giving away the one comfort she had left in the world to a woman riding into a winter storm, because she decided the woman needed it worse. Marin tried to give it back. Etta wouldn't take it. So Marin tucked the little fox inside her coat, against her heart, next to where her sister's letter was sewn, and she went out to the barn in the black cold before dawn, and saddled the deep-chested gelding that was the best I had. And I gave her everything I knew about the high country between us and Garnet, every line and every danger, and she took it all in and gave me back 2 corrections out of her own knowledge that were better than mine. Then she rode out my gate into the dark, a small fierce figure on a good horse, and was gone up the white toward the Thule, and I stood at the gate a long time after I couldn't see her any more, with a sleeping child behind me in the cabin, and a vow I'd made 15 years ago lying broken and finally beaten in the snow at my feet, and I found that I was not afraid the way I'd been afraid all my life. I was something else. I was a man with something to hold, and ground to hold it on, and I meant to hold it. I will tell the days she was gone quickly, because they were slow to live, and there is no use making you live them slow too. I taught Etta to braid a rope. I taught her to read a horse's ears. She taught me a song her mother used to sing, half of it, the half she remembered, and we sang it badly together over the dishes, and it became ours. I let her name the colt, the one Marin had gentled, and she named him Fox, which made us both go quiet a minute, and then she said it was a good name, and I agreed it was. I never let her out of arm's reach of the cabin. I never let the rifle out of arm's reach of me. I walked the gate and the tree line every few hours, day and night, reading the snow the way Marin had taught me to read it, and I slept in the chair by the door with my boots on. I thought about Marin on the Thule in the cold every single hour. I did not let myself think about the storm that everyone in that country knew was coming, the big one, the one that would shut the pass. I watched the sky for it instead, which is a more useful thing to do than worry, and worry less honest. The storm came on the 5th day. The wrong way. From the southwest, off the desert, the way the bad ones came, building all afternoon into a wall the color of a bruise standing over the western peaks, over the Thule, over the line she'd have to be riding back along if she'd gotten her paper, if she was even now coming home. I stood at the gate and watched it come, and I prayed, which I had not done since the draw, prayed to whatever it is that mines the high passes to let her be over and down, to let her be on this side of it, before it shut. And while I was watching the wrong sky, Royce Tamblyn came up the right one. It was the storm that brought him early. He'd counted on the new year, but he'd counted the storm too, the same as we had, and he was not a fool about everything. He'd reckoned that the big snow would shut the Thule, and that once it shut, no paper of Marin's could ever reach the valley till spring, and that the safest day to take the child by force was the day the law got locked out for the winter. So he came on the front edge of the storm, 4 men behind him now. He'd bought 2 more, riding up my open valley in the failing purple light with the wall of snow at their backs like the wrath of God, to take a 6-year-old girl out of a cellar before the lid came down for good. I had Etta in the cellar before they cleared the lower meadow, the trap door, the rug, the table, and I knelt down to her in the dark of it and I said, "You remember how you were quiet for your mama? You be quiet like that for me now. No matter what you hear up here. You stay quiet and you stay down and you don't come up for anybody but me or Marin, you understand? Anybody. Only me or Marin." And she nodded, white-faced, brave past all bearing, and she reached up and patted my hand once. He has good hands. And I shut the door on her and pulled the rug and set the table and went out to my gate to meet 5 men with 1 rifle and 1 stubborn vow turned all the way around. I want to set down here plainly that I did not stand at that gate because I am a brave man or a good shot or a hero out of a story. I stood there because I had finally, at 41 years of age, found the thing I was willing to be unsafe for. A man can carry a wound a long way by deciding nothing is worth the risk of bleeding again. The cure for it is not finding a thing that's safe to love. There is no such thing. The cure is finding a thing worth the danger and standing in front of it. They came up to my gate and stopped, the 5 of them strung out in a loose line, and Royce Tamblyn walked his horse a length forward. "I gave you till the new year," he said. "I'm a man of my word, I want that on the record. But the weather's moved my hand and the law's the law in any season. I've a writ here for the child and a clerk's order for your arrest if you obstruct it. Stand aside, Calder. There's no judge in 50 miles and there won't be one till April, and you are 1 man." He looked at the cabin, at the smoke from the stove, at the lit window where he thought a frightened woman was hiding. "Bring out the woman and the girl, or my men come through that gate and I let them earn their pay however they see fit. Your choice. Your last one." The storm wall had eaten the last of the light. Snow had begun to fall, big and slow, the front skirmishers of the army behind. Behind me in the cabin under the floor, a 6-year-old was being quiet for me the way she'd been quiet for her dying mother. And somewhere out in that closing white, I had to believe, a woman was riding for home with a paper against her heart and a wooden fox beside it. And the only thing I had to do, the only thing, was be a gate that did not open until she got there. "No," I said. "No." "You heard me. I've spent 15 years saying no to everything that ever wanted in. I find I'm good at it. I had my rifle, but I didn't raise it, because 5 guns will beat one every day and I knew it, and a raised gun would have started the only thing I couldn't win. So I did the one thing I had left, the thing that came up out of all those years of gentling frightened animals, which is that I made my voice quiet and certain and immovable, the voice you use on a 1,000-pound horse that could kill you if it chose, the voice that says I am not afraid of you and you are not going to do this. That child is not yours, Tamblyn. The land's not yours. The paper's not honest and you know it, and so does every man you've had to pay to ride up here in a blizzard to back it. And a thing you have to pay 5 men to help you do to a little girl is a thing you already know is wrong. You're not taking her tonight. You're not taking her ever. You'll have to come through this gate, and through me, And I'll tell you for free, I'm a poor enough man that there's not much you can ruin, and a stubborn enough one that you'll bury at least one of your bought men in my dooryard before it's done. And you'll do it in the dark in a storm a long way from any doctor, for a riverbank. So you go on and decide, right now, in front of these men whose wages you're behind on, whether that bottom land is worth dying in my dooryard for. Because I have decided what it's worth to me, I let that sit one breath. Enough. It is a strange word, that one. I have thought about why it landed the way it did. I think it is because it is not a threat and not a plea. It is a man drawing a line and standing on it and meaning it, and there is a kind of certainty in a man who has stopped negotiating that frightens men who only ever do things for pay. The two new hired men shifted in their saddles. They had not signed on to bury anybody in a blizzard. You could see the sum running behind their eyes, the same cold, arithmetic Marin did at the window. What's the lid keep in? And Royce Tamblyn saw it too, and it made him reckless, the way a soft man goes reckless when the thing he's bought starts slipping. He's one man, he said, too loud. He's bluffing. There's $200 to the man who. The shot came from up the ridge behind me and to the right, from the dark above the cabin, and it took the hat clean off Royce Tamblyn's head and spun it into the snow, and the crack of it rolled around the box of the valley and came back twice, and every man in that line ducked and grabbed for a gun and found nothing to shoot at. Because the shooter was up in the black timber where the last light couldn't reach, and the next shot, a heartbeat later, before any of them had even straightened, knocked the rifle out of the hands of the nearest hired man and left his fingers stinging and empty and him staring at them like they belonged to somebody else. 2 shots, 2 seconds, a hat and a rifle and not a drop of blood, and every man in that line suddenly understanding that there was a marksman in the dark above them who could have taken 5 heads in the time it had taken to take a hat, and had chosen the hat and the rifle on purpose to tell them exactly that. The next one's not a hat, Royce. Marin's voice came down off the ridge clear and flat and terrible in the snow quiet. Sights don't pull left up here. I checked. You tell your bought men what I just did to that rifle from 100 yards in the dark in a storm, and then you tell them what their $200 is worth against it, and then you all get off my husband's land. She had said husband. We were not married. We are now, but we were not then. I heard it land in me even in the middle of all that, the way you hear one true note in a loud room. She had made it back. That is the short of it. She'd ridden the 90 miles to Fort Garnet in 4 hard days, gotten in front of the federal commissioner her father had known, an honest one, as she'd promised, a man who took one look at June's letter witnessed by a doctor and a preacher, and one look at the smell of Royce Tamblyn's clerk-bought order, and did not need a long time to know which way the right of it ran. He'd issued a federal order nomming Marin Vance guardian of the child Etta Tamblyn, and putting the bottomland into a trust for the child's sole benefit until her majority, a thing no county clerk's paper could touch, and he'd sent a deputy U.S. Marshal to ride back with her and serve it, a square hard man named Ott who was, at that moment, sitting his horse 50 feet behind Royce Tamblyn's line in the falling snow, having come up the valley quiet in the dark while every eye was on me at the gate, with the storm covering his approach the way it had covered Royce's. Marin had ridden ahead of the marshal that last stretch, pushing the gelding through the front of the storm, because she'd seen Royce's tracks turn up the valley and she'd known what I was standing in front of, and she had not been about to let the law's slow, square pace put her 1 minute later to that ridge than she could be. She'd come over the back of the cabin on foot in the last of the light, up into her own timber, into a shooting position she'd scouted her first week here without telling me, because that is the kind of person Marin Vance is. She had picked the spot to defend the gate from before she decided to trust me, in case she ever had to defend it against me. And from up in that dark she had heard me say enough, and she had decided the time for being quiet was over. The marshal walked his horse forward into the lamplight that spilled from my window, and he had a star and a federal order and a shotgun across his saddle bow, and he read the order out loud in the snow in a bored, flat government voice, and it was a beautiful thing to hear. He told Royce Tamblyn that the county order he carried was vacated, that the child was the lawful ward of Marin Vance by act of the federal commissioner, that the bottomland was in trust and beyond his reach forever, and that there was, furthermore, a charge of procuring a false instrument waiting on him back at Garnet that the commissioner had taken a personal interest in, and that Mr. Tamblyn could ride back down the valley ahead of him, now, tonight, storm or no storm, and answer for it. The two new hired men were already gone. They'd faded back into the dark at the second shot, the way men do when the math turns against the wage, and good riddance. The other two looked at the marshal's star and the dark ridge full of Marin and decided their $200 was a thing best collected somewhere with a roof, and they went too. Royce Tamblyn sat alone on his horse in the snow, hatless, his bought army melted off him, his crooked paper made waste, his riverbank locked away from him forever in a trust for the very child he'd hunted to get at it. And for one moment I saw the whole shape of his life in his face. A man who'd wanted one piece of ground so long and so hard that he'd burned everything human in himself down to ash to get it, and was going to die not having it, and knew it. I did not hate him in that moment. I have never been able to since. A man like that is already in the worst place there is. "You'll ride ahead of me, Mr. Tamblyn," the marshal said, not unkindly, "or you'll freeze where you sit. It's your last free choice for a while, so make it." Royce Tamblyn looked once more at the lit window, at the gate, at me, and then up at the dark ridge where his death had cracked the hat off his head and chosen not to take the rest. And then he turned his horse and rode down my valley into the storm ahead of the marshal's gun, and I never saw him again. And the riverbank grew the best wheat in 3 counties for a child who could not yet spell her own name. I went up the ridge and brought Marin down. She was shaking by the time I reached her, not from fear, from the cold and the daze and the letting go of it all at once, the way you shake after, never during. I took the rifle out of her stiff hands, and I took her in my arms there in the dark timber with the snow coming down on us, and she put her face in my neck, and let go of 19 days and 90 miles and 1 impossible ride and 1 impossible shot, all of it. And I held her and said nothing, because there was nothing that needed saying, and some things a held body says better than a speech. Then we went down to the cabin, and I lifted the table and rolled back the rug and opened the cellar door, and a small white face looked up out of the dark, and Marin went down those steps faster than I have ever seen a human being move, and came up with the child in her arms, and Etta was saying her name over and over into her neck, "Marin, Marin. You came back. You said you would, and you did." And Marin was saying, "I'll always come back. I'll always, always come back." And the little wooden fox was somehow in both their hands at once, passed back where it belonged, and I stood in my own doorway and watched the two of them, and the storm closed over the valley behind me and shut the lid. And for the first time in my life I was glad to be locked in, because everything I wanted to be locked in with was inside. The pass stayed shut till April, the way it does, and we were snowed into Coldwater Park the whole long winter, the 3 of us in the cabin I'd built to keep the world out. And it was the best winter of my life, and I knew it while it was happening, which is a rare and precious thing, to know the good time while you are still inside it, and not only after looking back. We were married in the spring, by the same circuit judge who came back through with the thaw, with Harlan Prout and his wife to stand up for us and Etta to hold the ring, which she did with enormous seriousness, having appointed herself its guardian for the occasion. Marin wore a dress instead of trousers for the one day and looked like she'd rather be in a tree with a rifle and married me anyway, which is the only way I'd have wanted it. We did not make a great deal of fuss. We are neither of us fuss-making people. We said the words and meant them and went home to the horses. Etta grew up tall and quick and clever as her mother June and her Aunt Marin both, and she could read a track at 8 better than I'll ever read one, and she talked plenty by then, all the words she'd saved up in the silent year coming out of her in a flood that never quite stopped, and we did not mind a single one of them. When she came of age, the bottomland was hers, free and clear, the trust unlocked, the best ground in 3 counties, and she could have sold it for a sum that would have set her up anywhere in the world. She kept it. She runs it yet, with a good husband and children of her own who do not know what the word hunted means and never will, which is the whole of what their great-grandmother June died trying to buy them and bought. The little wooden fox sits on the mantel of the cabin to this day, between the clock and the lamp, worn pale at the ears and tail. Marin put it there the first spring, and it has not moved since. People who don't know ask about it sometimes, this rough little carving in a place of honor, and we just say it kept somebody safe once, and leave it at that, because the rest of it is ours. I think about that night at the barn door more than I think about anything else in a long life. The latch lifting in the storm, the knife held low and steady, the 2 pairs of eyes catching the lantern. I had spent 15 years building a wall against exactly that, against any living thing I might have to answer for, because I'd decided my hands couldn't be trusted with a life, and I'd had the proof of it in a draw with the wrong-colored mud. But the wound was never that I'd been wrong in the draw. Marin had it right by the fire that first winter. The wound was that I'd been alone, that I'd thought being the only one who could be trusted was the same as being safe, when it was only the same as being lonesome. A frightened woman with a child and a knife taught me different, by trusting me with the only thing she had left when she had every reason in the world to trust no one, and by walking the dangerous line beside me, and letting me walk it beside her, until between the 2 of us we caught everything the other one missed. That is the secret of it, I think, now that I am old and have had a long time to turn the stone over. A man does not heal by finding something safe to hold. There is nothing safe to hold. Everything worth holding can be lost, and the holding of it is the whole of the danger and the whole of the worth, both at once, inseparable. A man heals by finding the thing he is finally willing to be unsafe for, and standing in front of it at the gate, and saying to everything that ever taught him to keep the door shut and the heart buried and the hands to himself, saying it quiet and certain, and meaning it down to the ground. Enough. And then the door open at last in the storm, letting them in.